I had not even recovered from my emergency C-section yet when my husband filed for divorce. The hospital monitors were still beeping a steady rhythm of my survival when he stood at the foot of my bed, looking at our newborn son with absolute disgust. "You and that baby are just a massive burden to my future," he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. He tossed his wedding band onto the plastic tray table, turned his back on me, and boarded a flight abroad with his wealthy mistress. For 20 years, I was nothing to him, a ghost he left behind. Then yesterday, the heavy oak doors of my executive suite swung open, and the man who threw me away suddenly showed up demanding to meet his son. But when he learned exactly who my son was, the color drained completely from his face. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after someone tried to leave you with nothing. My name is Rebecca. I am 35 years old, and today I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer for one of the most powerful technology corporations in Seattle. My daily life is a symphony of high-stakes acquisitions, corporate warfare, and absolute authority. I clawed my way up from the very bottom of society, transforming myself from a terrified, abandoned 15-year-old mother into a woman forged from pure steel. I built a fortress around myself and my son Leo, making sure no one could ever make us feel small or helpless again. The morning my past came back to haunt me, I was sitting behind my massive mahogany desk, reviewing a confidential merger report. The rain was lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, casting a cool gray light across the polished floors. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of my executive suite did not just open. They were violently shoved apart with the kind of entitled aggression reserved for people who believe the entire world exists simply to serve them. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I kept my eyes locked on the financial projections on my digital tablet, slowly highlighting a line of text. I let the deafening silence of the vast room swallow their dramatic entrance, forcing them to stand there awkwardly while I finished my thought. Only when I was completely ready did I look up. Standing on my imported wool rug was Bradley. He was 38 now, but the years had not been kind to his soul. He wore a bespoke Italian suit that desperately tried to project immense wealth, but I could see the slight fraying at the cuffs and the manic, frantic energy in his eyes. Beside him stood his new wife, Fiona. She was 45, dripping in heavy gold jewelry and suffocating the room with an aggressive floral perfume. She looked around my pristine office with visible disdain, her lips curled into a permanent sneer, as if she had just stepped into a filthy alleyway rather than the top floor of a high-security corporate skyscraper. Bradley stepped forward, planting his hands firmly on the edge of my desk. "Rebecca," he said, using that same patronizing, arrogant tone he had perfected when I was just a vulnerable teenager. "Look at you, playing corporate dress-up. We need to talk right now." I leaned back slowly in my leather chair, steepling my fingers together. The sheer audacity of his presence after 2 decades of absolute silence was almost laughable. He had not sent a single dime for child support. He had never called on a birthday. He had erased my son and me from his narrative so completely that his own family pretended we had simply ceased to exist. And now he was standing in my sanctuary demanding my attention, as if he owned the building. Fiona crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets clanking loudly in the quiet room. "We do not have all day, little girl," she snapped, looking me up and down. "Bradley is a very busy man with important meetings. We are here for the boy. Tell him to pack a bag. We are taking him to a press dinner this afternoon." I let out a slow, controlled breath, masking the dangerous anger burning in my chest. The absolute delusion radiating from both of them was staggering. They had bypassed my assistant and bullied their way past the lobby security using some expired corporate credentials, marching in here expecting me to simply hand over the son they had treated like garbage. They had run a cheap background check, found out I worked in this building, and automatically assumed I was some low-level administrative assistant clinging to a meager paycheck. "You have exactly 10 seconds to remove your hands from my desk," I said. My voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried enough icy authority to make Bradley instantly flinch and pull his hands back. "And you have another 10 seconds to turn around and walk out those doors before I have security drag you out by your cheap lapels." Bradley let out a harsh, grating laugh that brought back a sickening flash of that cold hospital room. "Still so dramatic and emotional, Rebecca," he sneered. "Still acting like you hold any real power in the real world. I am not asking for your permission. I am his father. I have legal rights. We are doing a family photo shoot today for my investment fund, and my son is going to be in it." I stood up smoothly, buttoning the jacket of my tailored suit. "You forfeited your rights the moment you called my son a burden and ran off to Europe to play boy toy to her," I said, gesturing dismissively toward Fiona. "You do not have a son. You have a 20-year-old mistake that you ran away from. And you certainly do not have the clearance to be standing on this floor." Fiona stepped closer, her face turning an ugly, blotchy shade of red. "Listen to me, you glorified secretary," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "My husband is the CEO of a major international hedge fund. You are nothing but a minor employee in this company. If you do not produce that kid right now, I will personally call your boss and have you fired and blacklisted from this city for harassing a VIP guest." I did not smile, but a cold wave of immense satisfaction washed over my mind. They truly had absolutely no idea. They looked at my modest lack of flashy jewelry and my quiet demeanor, and assumed I was entirely disposable. They assumed the boy I had raised was just as helpless and desperate as they desperately wanted us to be. They had walked directly into the lion den, completely unaware that the jaws were already snapping shut around them. Bradley rolled his eyes, cutting off his wife's shrieking with a raised hand. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a leather-bound checkbook. With a flick of his gold fountain pen, he scribbled a few numbers, ripped the slip of paper from the binding, and slapped it onto the polished mahogany of my desk. $50,000. He tapped the paper with his index finger, projecting the false magnanimous aura of a wealthy savior. "More money than a low-level employee like you makes in 5 years," Bradley stated, his tone heavy with arrogant condescension. "I am buying one afternoon with the boy. I need him dressed nicely and brought to the Four Seasons downtown by 3 o'clock tomorrow. My investment fund is doing a major public relations profile on family values, and a reunion photo shoot is exactly the kind of press I need to calm my investors. Think of this as 20 years of retroactive child support." I looked down at the slip of paper resting on my desk. My right hand instinctively drifted to my abdomen, tracing the outline of the surgical scar hidden beneath my custom silk blouse. The phantom pain flared sharp and suffocating. Suddenly, I was 15 again, lying on a sterile hospital bed under harsh fluorescent lights. I could hear the rhythmic, terrifying beeping of the heart monitor and the fragile cries of the newborn baby I was entirely too weak to hold. I remembered the exact angle of Bradley's jaw as he stood at the door, his duffel bag packed for a luxurious European getaway, looking at us as if we were diseased. He had not seen a child. He had seen an anchor tied to his ankles. I lifted my gaze, meeting Bradley's eyes with absolute zero emotion. I let the silence stretch, watching the smug confidence on his face slowly curdle into confusion. $50,000, I repeated, my voice echoing coldly off the glass walls of the executive suite. "That is a generous offer for a simple photo shoot." "But I am slightly confused, Bradley." I tilted my head, throwing his exact unforgettable words from 2 decades ago directly back into his face. "I thought my son and I were just a massive burden to your future." Bradley shifted his weight, momentarily thrown off balance by hearing his own vile cruelty weaponized against him. A flash of genuine discomfort crossed his eyes before his arrogant smirk violently returned. "People grow up, Rebecca. I am offering you a lifeline here. Take the money and bring me the kid. Or do you prefer living paycheck to paycheck for the rest of your miserable life?" Fiona lost whatever microscopic shred of patience she possessed. She stepped forward, slamming her hands flat on my desk, her heavy gold rings scratching the immaculate wood surface. "You are pushing your luck, you pathetic little dropout," she snarled, her face twisting into a mask of pure elitist disgust. "Look at you. wearing cheap department store suits, working some dead-end desk job, and pretending you have any leverage in this room. Bradley is being incredibly generous. If you do not take this check right now, I will personally unleash our legal team on you. Fiona leaned in closer, her aggressive floral perfume making the air thick and nauseating. We have international lawyers on retainer who specialize in destroying women exactly like you. We will drag you through the family courts. We will expose you to the media as an unfit, unhinged teenage mother who maliciously kept a successful father away from his child. We will bankrupt you, force custody, and make sure you only see that boy on our terms. We will ruin your life. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply picked up the $50,000 check, holding it delicately by the corner. I maintained unbroken predatory eye contact with Fiona as I walked slowly over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder sitting in the corner of my office. I dropped the check into the slot. The machine roared to life, grinding Bradley's arrogant bribe into meaningless confetti within a matter of seconds. I walked back to my desk and pressed the silver intercom button. Security, we have 2 hostile trespassers in the executive suite. I need them escorted off the premises immediately. Use physical force if they resist. Bradley's face turned a dangerous, explosive shade of crimson. You stupid, arrogant little girl, he began, lunging toward my desk. The heavy oak doors flew open instantly. 4 heavily armed corporate security guards flanked my desk, grabbing Bradley by the shoulders and physically dragging him backward. Fiona shrieked, kicking and thrashing as 2 guards escorted her out by her arms, her expensive heels dragging across the imported rug. You will regret this, Bradley roared down the hallway as the guards forced them toward the private elevator. I will take everything from you. I will crush you. The heavy doors clicked shut, restoring the absolute pristine silence of my office. I stood by my desk, adjusting my cuffs, perfectly calm. The door to my private adjoining conference room quietly swung open. Jamal stepped out, adjusting his crisp designer tie and taking a slow sip from his porcelain coffee cup. Jamal was my former brother-in-law, married to Bradley's older sister, Tara. He was also a fiercely brilliant, highly respected black corporate attorney, and the only member of that entire twisted family who had ever treated me with an ounce of human decency. Over the past 20 years, he had become my most trusted confidant, my fiercest ally, and the chief legal counsel for my son's technology empire. Jamal chuckled, shaking his head as he walked over to the window, watching the rain pour over the towering Seattle skyline. They are completely bleeding out, Rebecca, he said, his deep voice filling the room with calm, strategic authority. Bradley's investment fund is crashing hard. Their stock took a massive dive this morning and his board of directors is panicking. The desperation is rolling off them in waves. I leaned against my desk, crossing my arms. He wants Leo for a photo shoot to project a stable family man image, I noted, piecing together the frantic urgency in Bradley's eyes. Jamal smiled, a razor-sharp, predatory smile. It is worse than that. Much worse. He is drowning in debt, and he thinks your son is just a naive, low-level pawn he can use to save his own life. He has no idea who he just declared war on. Jamal's words hung in the quiet atmosphere of my office, setting the stage for the absolute warfare that was about to unfold. By 6 o'clock the next morning, Bradley executed his retaliation. Knowing he did not possess the financial capital or the corporate leverage to fight me in a boardroom, he resorted to the only currency his family still had left: high society gossip and manipulative public relations. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping black coffee when Jamal forwarded a link to my secure tablet. The headline from a prominent Seattle digital media outlet glared back at me in a bold, aggressive font. It read, "A father denied the tragic secret behind a tech executive's stolen son." I tapped the screen, watching a polished, highly produced video interview begin to play. There sat Bradley wearing a modest, muted sweater designed entirely to make him appear humble and approachable. He was flanked by his mother, Caroline. I had not seen Caroline in 20 years, but she looked exactly the same. She was a woman who weaponized her country club memberships and pearl necklaces to mask a deeply rotten core. She had been the one to actively encourage Bradley to abandon me at the hospital, telling him a teenage bride from a poor neighborhood would ruin his precious pedigree. Now she was on camera dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. My son has spent 2 decades searching for his boy, Caroline, lied to the interviewer, her voice trembling with perfect theatrical distress. Rebecca was young, unstable, and deeply troubled. She vanished in the middle of the night and hid my beautiful grandson from us out of pure spite. Bradley has suffered every single day, leaving an empty chair at our holiday table, praying for the moment he could finally embrace his child and give him the life he deserves. The article below the video was a masterclass in character assassination. Bradley had clearly hired a ruthless boutique PR firm to spin a narrative that completely inverted reality. They painted me as a bitter, unhinged teenage mother who had maliciously manipulated the system to keep a loving, desperate father away. The piece conveniently omitted his European escapades with Fiona, his complete lack of child support payments, and the fact that I had lived in the exact same city under my real name for the last 10 years. They were leveraging his status as a hedge fund CEO to make his lies credible to the business community. They painted him as a tragic hero who was just now uncovering the truth, desperately trying to save his son from a mother who lacked the resources and pedigree to raise a young man properly. The campaign was engineered to force me into the open, to make me panic, and to make me hand over Leo simply to stop the public bleeding. By noon, the story had been picked up by 2 more local news stations and was gaining rapid traction on social media. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications. Reporters were gathering outside the lobby of my residential building and swarming the public entrance of my corporate headquarters. The court of public opinion was swift and brutal. Online commentators who knew absolutely nothing about my life were already branding me a villain, demanding that Bradley be given immediate access to the son he had supposedly been mourning. The pressure was intense, designed to suffocate me into submission. Jamal paced back and forth across my office later that afternoon, his phone pressed to his ear as he barked orders at his junior legal team. He ended the call and threw his phone onto the leather sofa. The frustration was radiating from his posture. "I have drafted a massive defamation lawsuit," Jamal stated, his deep voice vibrating with protective anger. "I have the cease and desist orders ready to serve to the media outlets, and I have our crisis management team standing by. We can release the hospital records from your delivery. We can release the court documents showing his voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. We can drop a nuclear bomb on this pathetic sob story right now and expose Caroline for the lying snake she is." I looked away from the television screen in my office, which was currently broadcasting a silent, muted clip of Bradley, looking somber for the cameras. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water and turned back to my desk, neatly organizing a stack of financial portfolios. "Hold the lawsuits, Jamal," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Tell the crisis management team to stand down. We are not releasing a single statement. We will not issue a denial, and we will absolutely not engage with the media." Jamal stopped pacing, staring at me with profound disbelief. "Rebecca, you cannot be serious. They are dragging your name through the mud. They are actively trying to destroy your professional reputation in the Seattle business sector. If you remain silent, the public will assume his ridiculous story is the truth." "Let them assume whatever they want," I replied, sitting down in my chair and opening my email. "Public opinion does not dictate corporate acquisitions, and it certainly does not pay off a $150 million debt to a European syndicate. Bradley is putting on this circus because he is terrified. He is trying to create a smokescreen of family values to secure the American investor buyout he desperately needs to survive." I pulled up the digital profile of Bradley's hedge fund, pointing at the plummeting numbers on the screen. "Look at his strategy, Jamal. He is using his mother to establish a false narrative of victimhood. He thinks that by cornering me publicly, I will eventually break under the pressure and deliver Leo to him just to make the cameras go away. He expects me to react like the terrified 15-year-old girl he left crying in a hospital bed." I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. When a desperate animal is running blindly toward a cliff, you do not step in front of them to correct their path. You step aside and let gravity do the work. I want Bradley to put every single one of his lies on the public record. I want Caroline's fake tears broadcast to every investor in this city. I want them to build their entire salvation on this fabricated story. Let them dig their own graves. Jamal slowly lowered himself into the chair opposite my desk, a realization dawning in his eyes as he grasped the sheer ruthlessness of my strategy. If we let them build their entire investor pitch on this lie, he murmured, a slow smile breaking across his face, the crash will be completely unrecoverable when the truth comes out. Exactly, I said, my voice hardening into a blade of pure ice. If we defend ourselves now, we just give them a chance to pivot and change their story. I refuse to play defense. Let them dig their graves on national television. Let them feel victorious. Let them believe they have me backed into a corner. Because when I finally close the trap, I want to make sure they have absolutely nowhere left to run. Rain pounded against the reinforced glass of my penthouse overlooking the Seattle harbor. It was past 2 in the morning, but sleep was a luxury I had discarded the moment Bradley barged into my office. I stood by the window holding a glass of scotch, watching the city lights blur in the downpour. The chime of my private elevator echoed through the quiet condominium. Only 2 people in the world had the biometric clearance to bypass the lobby directly to my floor: my son and Jamal. The elevator doors slid open. Jamal stepped into the foyer, shaking the rain from his dark trench coat. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes deepened by hours of relentless corporate espionage, but his posture radiated electric anticipation. He walked straight to my marble kitchen island and dropped a heavy military-grade encrypted tablet onto the surface. The metallic thud felt like a gavel striking a block. "I told you they were bleeding out," Jamal said, shrugging off his coat and loosening his tie. But I underestimated the severity of the wound. Bradley is not just facing a plummeting stock price or a panicked board of directors. He is staring down the barrel of total annihilation. I set my glass down and approached the island. "You cracked his offshore ledgers." Jamal tapped a complex sequence of passcodes into the tablet. The screen flared to life, illuminating the dark kitchen with harsh blue light. Cascading rows of hidden financial transactions, redacted wire transfers, and shell company shell games scrolled across the display. My contacts in Zurich and London finally came through. Jamal explained, his voice low and razor-sharp. "Bradley is running a glorified Ponzi scheme. He has been systematically embezzling from his own clients for the past 5 years to fund Fiona's grotesque spending habits and cover up his catastrophic market losses." I leaned over the tablet, my eyes tracking the massive deficits. "He hollowed out his own foundation. He gutted it completely," Jamal confirmed. "But here is the kill shot. Bradley tried to gamble his way out of the hole by borrowing from the wrong people. He took a massive influx of unregistered capital from a highly illicit European syndicate. These are not bankers, Rebecca. These are the kind of people who do not take executives to court when a debt is unpaid. They take everything. And right now, Bradley owes them exactly $150 million. The sheer scale of his recklessness hung in the cold air between us. Bradley was not a CEO seeking a PR victory. He was a dead man walking desperately, trying to construct a raft out of lies before the syndicate came to collect. "This explains the frantic desperation," I said, tracing a finger over a particularly damning wire transfer record. "He does not just want a photo op with Leo to soothe his current investors. He is staging a performance for a specific audience. Who is he trying to secure a buyout from?" Jamal brought up a new file on the screen featuring the logo of a massive, ultra-conservative American investment conglomerate. "Patriot Holdings," Jamal stated. "They have enough liquid capital to acquire Bradley's sinking fund and unknowingly wipe out his syndicate debt in a single stroke. But Patriot Holdings is entirely run by old money traditionalists. They heavily vet the personal lives of the executives they acquire. They despise scandal, they hate playboys, and they have rejected Bradley's proposals twice already because of his flashy, unstable reputation with Fiona." I let out a harsh, humorless laugh as the entire puzzle snapped into perfect clarity. "He needs a rebranding," I said, the disgust rising in the back of my throat. "He cannot sell Patriot Holdings on his financial acumen, so he is trying to sell them a redemption story." Jamal nodded, tapping the screen to bring up the smear campaign video Bradley had released earlier that day. Exactly. He is using this fabricated tragedy to transform his image overnight. He is no longer the reckless playboy who throws away investor money on Italian villas. Now he is the heartbroken, devoted family man who spent 20 years secretly mourning the child stolen from him by an unstable teenage girl. He is banking on the board members of Patriot Holdings, eating up this wholesome traditional family narrative. He brings Leo to the negotiating table, snaps a few photos playing the reunited father, secures the buyout, and uses the American capital to secretly pay off the European syndicate before they break his legs. A terrifying, absolute coldness washed over my entire body. The strategic game of corporate chess was instantly overridden by a vicious, primal maternal instinct. Bradley was not just insulting me in the press. By dragging Leo into his desperate scheme, he was inadvertently shining a massive spotlight on my son, while a ruthless European crime syndicate was actively hunting him down for $150 million. He is using my son as a human shield against a cartel. I stated the words tasting like ash. Jamal met my eyes, his expression dead serious. If Patriot Holdings walks away, the syndicate will tear Bradley apart. And when they realize he has a newly discovered, highly publicized heir, they might look toward Leo to leverage the debt. We cannot just let Bradley fail on his own anymore, Rebecca. We have to actively annihilate him before those people even realize Leo exists. I picked up my glass of scotch and poured it straight down the kitchen sink. The time for sitting back and watching him dig his own grave was officially over. He had crossed the one line I had spent 20 years reinforcing with steel and concrete. He had put my child in the crosshairs of his own monumental failures. I looked at the encrypted tablet, a lethal counteroffensive already forming in my mind. "You are right," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady calm. "We are not going to let him just fall. We are going to rip the ground out from under him so completely that he never breathes a free breath again. What is his next move? Where is he planning to parade my son for these investors?" Jamal pulled up a calendar schedule intercepted from Bradley's executive assistant. He is hosting the board members of Patriot Holdings at an exclusive gala at the Grand Hotel this Saturday. He issued a legal demand through his lawyers tonight. He is threatening to use every dirty loophole in the system to freeze your accounts and drag you through endless public litigation if you do not deliver Leo to that dinner. I stared at the glowing screen, a predatory focus locking into place. "He wants a family reunion," I whispered. "We will give him exactly what he asked for, but we are not going in defenseless." I turned to Jamal. "Call Leo. Tell him to get a secure line ready. It is time he learns exactly how his father operates. We are going to that dinner and we are going to tear his little redemption story to absolute pieces." Jamal tapped a command into his secure tablet, bypassing standard cellular networks and routing the call through a heavily encrypted proxy server. The screen flashed solid green. A few seconds later, the crisp, distortion-free audio of my son filled the dark kitchen. "I am here," Leo said. His voice was calm, analytical, and entirely devoid of panic. At 20 years old, he possessed a chilling degree of focus that mirrored my own. "Your father has made his move," I stated, resting my hands flat against the cold marble counter. "He is drowning in $150 million of illicit debt. He wants to parade you in front of his prospective American buyers this weekend to secure a bailout. He also sent a legal threat tonight to freeze my assets if we do not comply." A soft, abrasive scoff echoed over the speaker. "He thinks he can freeze your accounts. He is using a standard corporate litigation tactic against a ghost. My security protocols on your financials are military grade. His lawyers will hit a firewall that will fry their firm's servers if they try to ping your routing numbers." "I know," I replied, a sudden surge of fierce maternal pride warming the ice in my veins. "But we are not going to block his access. We are going to walk right into his trap." Jamal leaned over the tablet, his dark eyes gleaming with intense anticipation. "We need to talk about the second phase of his plan, Leo. Bradley is not just trying to sell Patriot Holdings on a wholesome family image. A redemption story is nice, but it does not justify a nine-figure bailout in the corporate world. He needs to offer them a crown jewel to sweeten the deal. And I just found out what that jewel is. Jamal swiped a heavily redacted file onto the main screen. The metallic geometric logo of Aegis Shield rotated in high definition. Your company, Jamal stated. Bradley's hedge fund has been quietly bleeding capital trying to secure a hostile takeover of Aegis Shield for the past 6 months. Patriot Holdings desperately wants a foothold in the cybersecurity sector. If Bradley can deliver a controlling stake in a multi-billion-dollar unicorn like Aegis Patriot, we'll buy his sinking fund tomorrow and wipe his syndicate debt clean. I frowned, looking at the glowing logo. Aegis is impenetrable. The board is fiercely private and the cap table is locked down under maximum security. Bradley does not have the leverage or the capital to force a buyout. He does not have the capital, Jamal corrected, his voice dropping into a register of pure lethal amusement. But he thinks he has the leverage. He thinks he has an inside man. Jamal tapped another document. It was a blurry, illegally obtained snapshot of an Aegis Shield payroll manifest. Highlighted in neon yellow near the bottom of the page was a single name, Leo. His private investigators dug into your life, Rebecca, Jamal explained, crossing his arms over his chest. They found out Leo dropped out of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology at 18. They tracked his sparse digital footprint to the Aegis Shield payroll. But here is the fatal miscalculation. Because Leo has maintained absolute anonymity because he wears cheap hoodies and dropped out of college, Bradley looked at this file and made a monumental assumption. I stared at the payroll manifest, the absolute absurdity of the situation finally clicking into place. He thinks Leo is a nobody. He thinks Leo is a bottom-tier junior coder. Jamal laughed, a rich, booming sound that filled the penthouse. Or worse, a glorified intern fetching coffee in the server room. Bradley is a classist snob. He looks at a 20-year-old college dropout raised by a single mother and sees a desperate, struggling kid. He has completely blinded himself to any other possibility. Over the speaker, Leo let out a cold, sharp breath. He wants to use me as a Trojan horse. Exactly, Jamal said, leaning closer to the microphone. Bradley plans to corner you at this gala. He is going to play the benevolent, wealthy savior. He will offer to pay off your supposed student debt. He will offer to fund your return to college. He will wave his expensive watch and his tailored suit in your face, expecting you to be dazzled by his wealth. And in exchange, Leo asked, his tone dropping to a dangerous, predatory whisper. In exchange, he will ask for a tiny, insignificant favor. I answered, anticipating the exact brand of corporate slime Bradley would employ. He will ask you to slide a backdoor code into the Aegis Shield mainframes. He wants internal financial metrics. He wants trade secrets. He wants the unredacted shareholder agreements. He needs you to steal the proprietary data that will allow his lawyers to blackmail the Aegis board of directors into a forced acquisition. He wants me to hack my own company, Leo stated. The absolute irony in his voice was razor sharp. He wants the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Shield to steal his own intellectual property and hand it over for the price of college tuition. It is the perfect crime in his eyes, Jamal added. He thinks he has found a disgruntled, underpaid kid who happens to share his DNA. He thinks you will be so desperate for his approval and his money that you will betray your employer without a second thought. It is the ultimate lifeline for his sinking ship. I looked out the window at the relentless Seattle rain. Bradley had constructed an elaborate high-stakes house of cards, completely unaware that he had built it directly on top of a landmine. He had spent his entire life measuring people by their designer labels and their pedigree. His arrogance had created a blind spot so massive it was going to swallow him whole. Leo, I said, turning back to the tablet. Bradley is going to demand your presence at this dinner. He expects a terrified, impressionable boy to walk through those hotel doors. Then that is exactly who he will get, Leo replied instantly. The ruthless intelligence in his response mirrored my own. I will wear my oldest sneakers. I will look properly intimidated by the chandeliers and the caviar. Let him offer his bribe. Let him outline his entire corporate espionage strategy. I want to hear him beg. He will not just beg, Jamal warned, his lawyer instincts taking over. If you hesitate, he will threaten you. He will threaten to ruin your career. He will threaten to have you fired from Aegis. He will use every psychological tactic in his arsenal to make you feel utterly powerless. Good, Leo said. Let him put the threats on the record. Ensure your recording device is fully charged, Mom. We are going to let him dig all the way to the bottom of the earth. I smiled a genuine, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. The trap was set. The bait was in place. Bradley thought he was walking into a grand redemption story, ready to use his estranged son as a stepping stone to corporate salvation. He had absolutely no idea he was walking into a slaughterhouse. Get some sleep, Leo, I instructed, my voice ringing with absolute unyielding authority. We have a gala to attend this weekend, and it is time to show your father exactly what happens when you underestimate the people you threw away. The line clicked dead. Jamal and I exchanged a long, silent look across the kitchen island. The war had officially begun, and we held the nuclear codes. The following morning brought a crisp, bitter chill to the Seattle air, perfectly matching the corporate warfare that was rapidly escalating. I arrived at my executive suite precisely at 7 o'clock. Waiting for me at the reception desk was a nervous-looking process server holding a thick, heavy manila envelope. I signed for the package without a word, carrying it into my office just as Jamal arrived with 2 cups of black coffee. We spread the documents across my mahogany desk. It was a masterclass in dirty, aggressive legal intimidation. Bradley had hired a bottom-feeder law firm known for unethical tactics, the kind of lawyers who relied entirely on bullying people who lacked the resources to fight back. The first page was a harsh cease and desist order, demanding I immediately stop my malicious alienation of his supposed parental rights. The document was filled with empty threats and fabricated claims designed entirely to incite panic. But the second page was where Bradley tried to bare his teeth. His lawyers had managed to track down my personal checking accounts. They were the visible, highly modest accounts I used to pay for basic groceries, minor utilities, and daily coffee. They had completely missed the complex, heavily encrypted web of corporate trusts, offshore holdings, and massive investment portfolios that actually held my wealth. Jamal read over the financial injunctions, shaking his head in sheer amusement. He is citing an obscure, highly unethical loophole regarding retroactive marital assets and contested child support, Jamal explained, tossing the paper onto the desk. He is filing an emergency motion to freeze your visible checking accounts. He actually thinks cutting off your access to a few $1,000s will starve you out. He wants to financially paralyze you so you have no choice but to surrender Leo to him. Before I could respond, my private desk phone rang. The caller ID displayed a blocked number, but I knew exactly who was on the other end. I pressed the speaker button, signaling Jamal to stay completely silent. Rebecca, Bradley said. His voice oozed with unearned triumph and greasy arrogance. I assume you received my care package this morning. I kept my posture perfectly relaxed, but I deliberately injected a note of artificial panic into my voice. I needed him to believe his cheap tactics were working. You cannot freeze my bank accounts, Bradley. I have bills to pay. I have rent. He chuckled, the sound dripping with pure malice. I can do whatever I want, Rebecca. You are playing in the big leagues now. You thought you could hide my son from me and face zero consequences. I am showing you exactly what happens when you defy someone with real power. My lawyers will drain you dry before you even make it to a courtroom. I will crush you until you have nothing left. What do you want? I asked, forcing my breathing to sound shallow and erratic, playing the part of the defeated, desperate single mother he desperately wanted me to be. Bradley paused, savoring what he believed was his total victory. I am hosting a private high society dinner this Saturday at the Grand Hotel. The board members of Patriot Holdings will be there. You are going to bring the boy. He will be dressed appropriately, and he will smile for the cameras. You will stand quietly in the background and let me introduce him to my investors as the son I have desperately been searching for. You will not cause a scene, and you will not speak unless spoken to. And if I refuse, I challenged, keeping the fake tremble in my tone perfectly balanced. If you refuse, I will personally guarantee that you and that boy never work in the Seattle tech industry again, Bradley threatened. His voice dropped into a harsh, vicious register. I know your boss. I will have you fired by Monday morning. You will be blacklisted from every corporate office in this state. And as for Leo, I know he is scraping by as some low-level coder at Aegis Shield. I play golf with men who sit on corporate boards. I will make one phone call to the executives at Aegis and have your son blacklisted before he even realizes what hit him. He will be sweeping floors for the rest of his pathetic life. The absolute irony of his threat hung in the air, heavy and hilarious. Bradley was threatening to call the chief executive officer of Aegis Shield to fire the chief executive officer of Aegis Shield. I looked up at Jamal, who was covering his mouth with his hand, physically struggling to stop himself from bursting into laughter. "Please, Bradley," I pleaded, delivering an Oscar-worthy performance. "Do not involve his job. He needs that paycheck. I will bring him to the hotel. Just please do not ruin his career. Do not take this out on him." That is what I thought, Bradley sneered, his massive ego swelling to catastrophic proportions. "The dinner is at 8. Do not be late, Rebecca, and try to wear something that does not look like you bought it off a clearance rack. My wife and I have an image to maintain." The line clicked dead. I reached out and ended the speakerphone connection. The fake panic instantly vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. Jamal finally let out the laugh he had been holding in, leaning back against my glass wall. He is going to call the executives at Aegis. He is going to have Leo blacklisted. This is too good. It is almost a shame we have to destroy him. He is providing excellent entertainment. I gathered the ridiculous legal documents and tossed them directly into the recycling bin. "He thinks he has cornered a mouse," I stated, walking over to the window to look out over the city that my son and I essentially owned. "He relies entirely on fear because he has absolutely no real capital left. He is an empty suit, making empty threats, trying to bully women and children because he is terrified of the criminals he actually owes money to." "We need to coordinate with Leo's security team," Jamal advised, switching back into his role as chief legal counsel. "Bradley is unstable. If he feels cornered at this gala, or if Patriot Holdings delays their buyout, he might act unpredictably. We need to ensure every possible exit is sealed." "Let him try to run," I replied, turning back to my desk with a predatory smile. "We will give him enough rope to hang himself 10 times over." He issued his ultimatum. He wants his estranged son at a 5-star hotel to impress his investors. We will deliver exactly what he asked for, but it will be a package he will never survive opening. The war room was not a boardroom filled with glass and chrome, but rather the reinforced soundproof basement of Jamal's private residence. It was a space designed for total security, lined with dark acoustic panels, and illuminated by the harsh glow of server racks and high-resolution monitors. I arrived with my encrypted files, Jamal with his legal briefs, and Leo with his laptop. Leo sat silently in the corner, enveloped in an oversized black hoodie that swallowed his frame. To anyone else, he would look like a typical, slightly sullen 20-year-old. He stared intently at the glowing lines of code scrolling down his screen, his fingers flying across the keyboard with terrifying speed and precision. He had not spoken since we entered the room, his silence acting as a heavy anchor to the chaotic energy swirling around us. "We have exactly 36 hours until the gala," Jamal began, spreading his files across the large steel table. "Bradley believes he holds all the cards. He thinks he can use this cease and desist to starve you financially, forcing you to bring Leo to the dinner as a show of surrender. He expects a terrified teenager and a defeated ex-wife." I nodded, pacing the length of the room. "He is relying entirely on the element of surprise and brute force intimidation. He wants to isolate Leo, offer him the bribe, and coerce him into planting the backdoor code into Aegis Shield. If we just show up and refuse, he will immediately pivot, claim we are uncooperative, and still attempt to leverage his reunion narrative to Patriot Holdings." "Exactly," Jamal agreed. "A simple refusal is not enough. We need to weaponize his arrogance. We need him to fully commit to the extortion, to explicitly detail his plan to steal trade secrets, and we need it all on record. If we can capture his confession, his entire acquisition deal with Patriot Holdings evaporates, and the European syndicate will tear him apart." Leo stopped typing. He pushed his hood back slightly, revealing sharp, intelligent eyes that perfectly mirrored my own cold determination. He wants me to wear a wire. No, I corrected sharply, turning to face my son. A wire is too risky. If his security team sweeps you and finds a physical device, he will immediately shut down the conversation and claim entrapment. We need something seamless, something that relies on his own hubris. I walked over to the table and picked up a specialized discrete recording device Jamal had procured. It was designed to look like a standard high-end lapel pin, the kind a wealthy executive might wear. I will wear this. I will be in the room but invisible. Bradley thinks I am a low-level employee. He will not consider me a threat, and he certainly will not expect me to be the one gathering the evidence. Jamal frowned, a flicker of concern crossing his face. Rebecca, if you wear that and he catches you, he will not just verbally attack you. He is desperate, and desperate men are dangerous. If he realizes you are recording him trying to orchestrate corporate espionage, he might physically lash out. Let him, I said, my voice devoid of fear. If he lays a hand on me, it only adds assault to the extortion charges. But he won't. He is too obsessed with maintaining his image in front of Patriot Holdings. He needs this gala to go perfectly. He will try to isolate Leo, and I will ensure I am positioned close enough to capture every word. Leo leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. So I play the part of the intimidated kid. I let him dangle the money, let him explain how he plans to save me from my dead-end job at Aegis. He let out a dark, humorless chuckle. I can do that. I will let him feel like the smartest man in the room. He will use psychological tactics, Leo, Jamal warned, pacing near the server racks. He will try to belittle your current position. He will tell you that Aegis Shield does not value you, that you are just a replaceable cog in their machine. He will use your lack of a college degree against you, offering to fix your life if you just do this one small favor. I understand, Leo replied, his tone chillingly flat. I know exactly how to play him. I will let him outline the entire process, how to bypass the firewalls, what specific financial metrics he needs to force the buyout. I will ask clarifying questions to ensure he explicitly incriminates himself. I walked over and placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. This is not just about surviving his threats, Leo. This is about dismantling the man who thought we were nothing. We are going to let him build his gallows, and we are going to hand him the rope. Jamal pulled up the layout of the Grand Hotel's VIP lounge on the main monitor. The VIP lounge is adjacent to the main ballroom. Bradley has it reserved for private conversations. He will likely pull Leo in there while the Patriot Holdings board members are mingling outside. Rebecca, you need to find a way to remain in that lounge without arousing suspicion. I will handle it, I said, studying the floor plan. He expects me to be the quiet, subservient ex-wife hovering in the background. I will blend in perfectly. The three of us stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the impending confrontation settling over the room. We were not just planning to thwart an extortion attempt. We were orchestrating the complete and total destruction of a man who had built his life on cruelty and deception. The trap was set, the roles were assigned, and Bradley was walking blindly into a scenario from which he would never recover. 36 hours, Leo murmured, pulling his hood back over his head. Let the countdown begin. The Grand Hotel was a monument to Seattle's old money, an imposing structure of dark stone and polished brass that overlooked the harbor. The ballroom level was awash in the warm golden light of crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the murmur of discreet wealth and the scent of expensive catering. I stepped off the main elevator, my posture perfectly rigid, my face an impenetrable mask of submission. I was wearing a simple, understated gray dress, a deliberate choice designed to make me appear exactly as Bradley and Fiona expected, unremarkable, out of place, and intimidated by my surroundings. Leo walked beside me, his head slightly bowed, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a faded black hoodie. He played the part of the reluctant, sullen 20-year-old beautifully. We had arrived precisely at 7:45, 15 minutes before Bradley's grand dinner was scheduled to begin. We barely made it past the velvet ropes of the VIP lounge before Fiona intercepted us. She materialized from the crowd of early arrivals, like a shark sensing blood in the water. She wore a stunning emerald green evening gown that clung tightly to her frame, her neck heavy with a diamond necklace that likely cost more than the average American home. Fiona stopped directly in front of me, her gaze sweeping slowly from the sensible heels of my shoes to the modest neckline of my dress. A harsh, delighted laugh escaped her painted lips. "I see you took the dress code as a mere suggestion." Fiona sneered, her voice carrying just enough volume to turn the heads of a few passing investors. "You look like you are dressed for a parent-teacher conference in the suburbs, not an exclusive gala. Did you seriously think we were going to let you sit at the table looking like that?" I kept my eyes lowered, maintaining my subservient facade. "Bradley told me I had to be here," I said, allowing my voice to tremble slightly. "He said I had to bring Leo." Fiona looked past me to my son, a look of pure predatory satisfaction crossing her features. "Yes, the boy is required. You, however, are a massive liability. Bradley needs this dinner to be absolutely perfect. He is pitching a 9-figure acquisition to the board of Patriot Holdings, and the absolute last thing he needs is his pathetic, dumpy ex-wife sitting at the table reminding everyone of the trash he left behind." She stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of her aggressive floral perfume was suffocating. "I told Bradley to have you wait in the lobby," she hissed, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. "But he insisted on keeping you close just to ensure the boy behaves. So we came up with a compromise." Fiona snapped her manicured fingers. A young, anxious-looking catering manager rushed forward carrying a starched white apron and a black uniform vest. "If you want to stay in this room and chaperone your son, you are going to blend in with the help," Fiona commanded, snatching the apron from the manager and shoving it hard against my chest. "Put this on. You will not sit at the table. You will not speak to the guests. You will stand in the corner and pour water. If you drop a single glass, or if you say one word that embarrasses my husband, I will have security throw you out, and Bradley will make good on his threat to destroy this boy's future." I looked down at the stark white apron in my hands. The sheer, overwhelming arrogance of the woman was breathtaking. She genuinely believed she had reduced me to a servant. She thought she was humiliating me, breaking my spirit in front of Seattle's elite. She had absolutely no idea that she was handing me the exact camouflage I needed to destroy her life. I slowly lifted my head, making sure she saw a flash of well-feigned, desperate humiliation in my eyes. "I will do it," I whispered, playing the broken woman perfectly. "Just please do not let Bradley ruin Leo's job. He works so hard." Fiona smiled, a victorious, ugly expression that twisted her features. "Good girl. Now go put that on before the important people arrive, and make sure my champagne glass is never empty." She spun on her heel and glided back into the VIP lounge, leaving me standing with Leo in the corridor. Leo watched her retreat, his jaw clenched tightly. "If she speaks to you like that again," he muttered, his voice dropping into a register of cold, absolute fury. "Do not break character," I instructed sharply, my own voice steady and devoid of the panic I had just projected. "She gave us exactly what we wanted. She just made me invisible." I turned and walked toward the discreet service corridor adjacent to the lounge, pulling the catering vest over my dress. As I tied the apron strings around my waist, I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress and retrieved the specialized recording device Jamal had provided. It was a tiny, high-powered microphone, smaller than a button, designed to pick up clear audio from 30 feet away. I carefully pinned it beneath the thick, starched fabric of the apron directly over my heart, ensuring the mic was completely concealed, but perfectly positioned to capture every sound in the room. I smoothed down the front of the uniform, transforming myself completely. I was no longer Rebecca, the chief strategy officer. I was nobody. I was a fixture, a piece of furniture, a silent servant holding a silver water pitcher. I stepped back into the VIP lounge through the service entrance, melting into the shadows near the bar. The room was beginning to fill with the heavy hitters of Patriot Holdings. Older men in expensive suits, their wives dripping in quiet, understated jewelry. They were the apex predators of the corporate world, the old money billionaires Bradley desperately needed to impress to save himself from the European syndicate. Bradley was holding court near the center of the room, his arm draped possessively around Fiona's waist. He was smiling, laughing, projecting the image of a confident, secure CEO. Then his eyes found Leo. My son was standing awkwardly near a towering floral arrangement, his hands still in his hoodie pockets, looking appropriately overwhelmed by the opulence of the room. Bradley's smile widened, a predatory gleam flashing in his eyes. He broke away from his group of investors and strode directly toward Leo, ready to initiate the trap. I picked up a silver water pitcher from the bar and silently moved closer, blending seamlessly into the background. My heart pounded a steady rhythmic beat against the hidden microphone. The humiliation Fiona intended had simply armed me. I was in position, invisible, and ready to record the exact moment Bradley destroyed his own life. The ballroom was a masterpiece of orchestrated opulence. Waitstaff moved with practiced silence, offering trays of seared scallops and truffles to guests adorned in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns. I navigated the sea of wealth with a silver tray of champagne, keeping my head bowed just enough to avoid direct eye contact, while remaining perfectly positioned to hear everything. My uniform rendered me entirely invisible, just as Fiona had intended. To these people, I was not a person. I was simply an extension of the catering service, a silent mechanism for refilling their glasses. I drifted toward a cluster of high-top tables near the center of the room, my hidden microphone capturing the sharp clinking of crystal and the low hum of corporate negotiations. Bradley was holding court, surrounded by three of the most influential board members from Patriot Holdings. He looked the part of the visionary CEO, his smile effortless and his posture exuding a manufactured confidence. "It is all about long-term stability," Bradley was saying, his voice smooth and persuasive as I stepped up to refill his glass. "Patriot Holdings understands that true growth requires a solid foundation. That is what my fund offers. We are not interested in reckless market speculation. Our investments are secured by tangible assets and deep generational reserves." I poured the champagne, my hand perfectly steady. Every word out of his mouth was a calculated lie. He was currently bleeding millions sustained entirely by the illicit funds from a European syndicate, yet he stood here painting a picture of financial invulnerability. The microphone pinned beneath my apron captured his deception with flawless clarity. One of the board members, an older man with silver hair and a stern expression, nodded approvingly. "We appreciate a conservative approach, Bradley. Your recent market reports were impressive, but Patriot values leadership as much as numbers. We have seen too many funds collapse because the executives lack personal stability." Bradley placed a hand over his heart, executing a look of practiced, solemn sincerity. I could not agree more. A man's business is only as strong as his family. My wife and I have built our lives on those principles. And tonight, I want to introduce you to the greatest point of pride in my life. He gestured toward the VIP lounge. "I have spent the last 20 years tirelessly searching for my son. He was taken from me under incredibly difficult circumstances, hidden away by a troubled mother who lacked the resources to care for him properly. But I never gave up hope. I never stopped looking. And tonight, he is finally here with me." The board members exchanged impressed, sympathetic glances. The narrative was working perfectly. Bradley was spinning his abandonment into a tale of relentless, devoted fatherhood. "That is quite a story," Bradley, the silver-haired board member, remarked, his tone softening. "It speaks volumes about your character. We look forward to meeting him." I stepped away, blending back into the crowd, my chest tight with a cold, controlled fury. The audacity to use the trauma he inflicted upon us as a marketing tool was staggering, but it was exactly what Jamal and I had anticipated. Bradley was weaving a web of deceit so elaborate and so thoroughly documented on my recording device that when the truth finally emerged, the fallout would be absolute. I continued my rounds, ensuring I remained within listening distance, as Bradley migrated from group to group, repeating variations of the same fabricated narrative. He spoke of his vast offshore wealth, deliberately misleading the investors about his liquidity. He described his aggressive acquisition strategies, hinting heavily at an imminent massive takeover in the cybersecurity sector that would guarantee extraordinary returns for Patriot Holdings. He was laying the groundwork for his extortion of Leo, framing the impending theft of Aegis Shield's proprietary data as a brilliant, legitimate business maneuver. Every lie, every exaggerated claim, every manipulation was being meticulously recorded. As the dinner hour approached, the guests began moving toward the main dining area. The VIP lounge gradually emptied save for a few stragglers. I positioned myself near the entrance to the lounge, holding a fresh pitcher of ice water, waiting for the inevitable. Bradley broke away from a group of investors, his smile dropping the instant he turned his back to them. The confident CEO facade vanished, replaced by the frantic, desperate energy of a man running out of time. He motioned sharply to Fiona, who had been holding court near the bar, then strode purposefully into the VIP lounge. Leo was sitting on a plush leather sofa, staring blankly at his phone. He looked up as Bradley approached, his expression perfectly arranged into a mask of nervous anticipation. I stepped into the lounge, moving silently to a side table to arrange a display of crystal glasses. I was close enough to capture their conversation, yet positioned perfectly as an ignored servant. Bradley stood over Leo, adopting a posture of aggressive authority. The time for the photo shoot had passed. Now came the real reason he had forced his son to this gala. He leaned down, placing both hands on the glass coffee table, cornering Leo. "Listen to me very carefully," Bradley began, his voice dropping into a harsh, commanding whisper. "The people out there are about to hand me the capital I need to secure our family's future. I have painted a very specific picture of you tonight, and you are going to help me complete it." Leo looked up, his voice appropriately small and hesitant. "I am just a junior coder. I do not know anything about your business." "You do not need to know my business," Bradley snapped, his patience evaporating. "You need to know yours. Aegis Shield is a fortress and I need the keys. I know you have access to their lower-level server architecture. You are going to go into work on Monday and you are going to install a backdoor routing sequence." I kept my back turned, my hands moving rhythmically over the glasses, while the microphone recorded the exact moment Bradley crossed the line from corporate deception into criminal extortion. The trap had officially snapped shut. The air in the VIP lounge was thick with the scent of leather and expensive cigars. Bradley paced the length of the room, his agitation visible in the sharp, jerky movements of his hands. Leo sat motionless on the sofa, his posture relaxed but guarded. I stood in the corner, a silver water pitcher in hand, ensuring my body shielded the microphone pinned beneath my apron. The silence stretched, a taut wire vibrating with unspoken tension. Bradley finally stopped pacing and turned to face Leo. "I am going to speak plainly," he said, his voice dropping into a harsh, conspiratorial whisper. "You are currently wasting your life. You dropped out of a top-tier university to work as a code monkey for a company that does not care if you exist. You are a rounding error on their balance sheet." Leo looked up, his expression perfectly blank. "I am doing fine." "Fine is for mediocre people," Bradley snapped, the arrogance bleeding through his attempted paternal tone. "I do not do fine. I am offering you a chance to be exceptional. I have a proposition that will secure your future and mine." Bradley reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a pristine white envelope. He tossed it onto the glass coffee table, where it landed with a soft thud. "There is $10,000 in that envelope. Cash. That is enough to cover your tuition for a semester at a real university, to get you out of whatever cramped apartment you are living in and to put you back on track to a respectable life." Leo stared at the envelope, then slowly lifted his gaze to meet Bradley's. "And what do I have to do for this $10,000? Bradley smiled, a predatory expression that chilled my blood. "It is a simple task, really. Aegis Shield is sitting on a goldmine of proprietary data, and they are mismanaging it. They lack vision. I have the vision, and I have the capital to execute it. But I need access." He leaned closer, his voice dropping even further. "I need you to install a backdoor routing sequence into their mainframes. Nothing destructive. Just a quiet, undetectable pipeline that feeds me their internal financial metrics, unredacted shareholder agreements, and key trade secrets. With that data, I can force a buyout. I can acquire Aegis Shield, restructure their leadership, and maximize their potential." I poured a glass of water, my movements slow and deliberate, ensuring every word of his extortion was captured perfectly. He was not just asking his son to commit corporate espionage. He was detailing the exact mechanism by which he intended to execute a hostile takeover, all while dangling a pathetic bribe masquerading as parental support. "You want me to steal from my employer?" Leo stated, his tone devoid of surprise or indignation. He was playing the part flawlessly. "I want you to be smart," Bradley corrected smoothly. "It is not stealing if you are facilitating a necessary restructuring. Think of it as a strategic realignment. You are providing the key to a better future for Aegis, and in return, I am providing the key to a better future for you." Leo picked up the envelope, testing its weight in his hand. He looked at Bradley, his expression unreadable. "What if I get caught? Aegis Shield security protocols are not easily bypassed. If they trace the back door to me, I could face federal charges." Bradley scoffed, dismissing the concern with a wave of his hand. "You will not get caught if you do exactly what I tell you. I have cybersecurity experts standing by to guide you through the process. And even if they do detect an anomaly by the time they trace it, the acquisition will be complete. I will own the company, and I will ensure your involvement is erased from the records." He leaned back, spreading his arms in a gesture of magnanimous assurance. "You are my son. I protect my own. You do this for me, and I guarantee your position in the new Aegis structure. You will not be a junior coder anymore. You will be an executive." I gripped the handle of the water pitcher, my knuckles turning white. The sheer hypocrisy was breathtaking. He had abandoned this child without a second thought, and now he was offering him a fabricated executive title in exchange for committing a felony. Leo set the envelope back on the table, his movements slow and deliberate. $10,000 is a significant amount of money, he said softly, looking down at his hands. "But it is a massive risk. If I'm going to compromise Aegis Shield's entire infrastructure, I need assurances. I need to know this is not just a setup." Bradley sighed, an exaggerated expression of parental frustration. "I am handing you your future on a silver platter, and you are asking for assurances. Fine. What do you need?" "I need to know exactly what data you are targeting," Leo said, his voice gaining a subtle edge. "I need the specific financial metrics and the exact shareholder agreements you mentioned. If I am going to build the pipeline, I need the precise coordinates of your targets." Bradley hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly, but the desperation to secure the Patriot Holdings buyout overpowered his caution. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Leo. "This is the list. It details the specific quarterly projections, the unredacted cap table, and the pending patent applications I need access to. Build the backdoor route, the data to the encrypted server address at the bottom of that page, and the money is yours." I stepped back into the shadows, a cold, triumphant smile touching my lips. He had done it. Bradley had just handed over physical evidence of his intent to commit corporate espionage, perfectly complementing the audio recording of his extortion attempt. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had utterly crushed him. I set the heavy silver water pitcher down on the glass coffee table. The sharp clink of metal against glass shattered the conspiratorial atmosphere in the VIP lounge instantly. Bradley jumped, whipping his head around to face me. For a split second, he looked genuinely startled, completely failing to recognize the woman standing in the stark white apron. Then realization dawned, followed immediately by a surge of pure, venomous irritation. "What are you doing in here?" Bradley demanded, his voice dropping into a harsh hiss to avoid drawing attention from the main ballroom. "Fiona told you to stand in the corner and pour drinks. Get out." "We are in the middle of a private business discussion." I did not move. I reached back slowly, untying the rigid strings of the catering apron and letting the starched white fabric fall directly onto the polished floor. I straightened my posture, shedding the invisible, subservient persona I had worn for the past hour. The transformation was instantaneous. "It is no longer a private discussion, Bradley," I said, my voice ringing with absolute, unyielding clarity. "It is a documented extortion attempt." I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was brightly lit, displaying a live audio waveform that had been steadily pulsing for the last 40 minutes. I held it up so the blue light illuminated the sudden, terrifying realization washing over his face. I have every single word I stated, locking my eyes with his. I have you offering my son $10,000 in cash. I have you explicitly detailing your plan to commit corporate espionage against Aegis Shield. I have you naming the specific financial metrics, the unredacted cap tables, and the pending patent applications you want him to steal. I have the entire blueprint of your hostile takeover strategy perfectly recorded in high definition. Bradley stared at this pulsing blue line on the screen. The arrogant visionary CEO act completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a desperate cornered animal. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and sweating under the dim lounge lights. He looked from me to Leo, who was still sitting on the sofa, holding the list of target data. You set me up. Bradley breathed, his hands balling into fists at his sides. You set yourself up, I corrected smoothly. You walked in here assuming you were the smartest person in the room. You looked at my son and saw a cheap pawn. You looked at me and saw a helpless waitress. Your arrogance made you sloppy, Bradley. The sheer weight of his impending ruin hung in the air for a fraction of a second before his panic mutated into explosive, uncontrollable rage. Bradley lunged across the glass table. His movement was so fast and violent that he knocked over the silver water pitcher, sending ice water cascading across the floor. Before I could step back, his hand lashed out, striking my wrist with brutal force. The impact sent my phone flying through the air. It hit the marble pillar near the bar with a sickening crack before dropping to the floor. Bradley did not stop there. He marched over to where the phone lay, face up, the audio waveform still visibly pulsing. He raised his custom Italian leather shoe and brought his heel down on the screen. The glass shattered with a sharp crunch. He stomped on it again and again, twisting his heel into the delicate circuitry until the screen went entirely black, and the phone was nothing more than a mangled pile of plastic metal and shattered glass. He stood over the destroyed device chest, heaving his expensive suit jacket slightly askew. He stared at the broken pieces for a moment, and then a low, grating laugh erupted from his chest. The laugh grew louder, echoing off the mahogany walls of the VIP lounge. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his confidence snapping violently back into place. You really thought you had me, did you not? Bradley mocked, turning back to face me with a look of absolute terrifying superiority. You really thought a pathetic little dropout in a catering uniform could outsmart a chief executive officer? You think recording a conversation changes the power dynamic in this room? He stepped closer, invading my personal space just as Fiona had done earlier. He pointed a finger directly at my face. I am Bradley. I manage billions of dollars. I dine with politicians and board members who control this city. And who are you, Rebecca? You are a nobody. You are a waitress playing spy games with a cheap smartphone. He kicked a piece of the shattered screen across the floor. Without that phone, you have absolutely zero proof. It is your word against mine. And who do you think the authorities are going to believe? A highly respected hedge fund manager with a team of corporate lawyers, or a bitter, unstable ex-wife who has spent 20 years holding a grudge? Leo stood up from the sofa, finally breaking his silence. You just destroyed her property. You assaulted her. Bradley turned his derisive sneer toward his son. Assault. I tripped. The phone fell. It was an accident. And you are going to back up exactly what I say, Leo, because if you do not, I will make good on every single threat I made tonight. You are nothing but a bottom-tier coder fetching coffee and writing useless scripts for a company that does not even know your name. I am offering you the world, and you let your mother drag you down into her pathetic, small-minded games. Bradley stepped toward the door, straightening his tie and shooting his cuffs to ensure his gold cufflinks caught the light perfectly. He had completely convinced himself that he had won. He believed he had neutralized the threat through sheer physical intimidation and corporate leverage. You have until Monday morning to deliver that backdoor code, Bradley ordered, his voice returning to that smooth, authoritative tone he used to charm his investors. If you try to pull another stunt like this, I will not just ruin your careers. I will call the executives at Aegis Shield. I will have you fired by Monday morning. I will bury you both so deep under legal fees and public scandals that you will beg me for a job serving coffee. He gave the shattered remains of my phone one last dismissive look. Clean up this mess, Rebecca. Try to act like a professional for the rest of the evening. Bradley turned on his heel and strode out of the VIP lounge, re-entering the main ballroom, to rejoin the board members of Patriot Holdings, a victorious smile already plastered back onto his face. Leo watched him go, his jaw locked tight. He looked down at the broken pieces of plastic and glass scattered across the floor, then looked up at me. His eyes were blazing with a quiet, lethal intensity. I did not flinch. I did not panic. I simply reached down to the hem of my dress, reaching beneath the fabric to the tiny, high-powered microphone still perfectly pinned over my heart. I tapped the small, unblinking green light indicating the recording was still actively transmitting. He thought he had destroyed the evidence. He had absolutely no idea he had just added physical aggression and destruction of property to his growing list of federal crimes, and Jamal already had every single second saved securely on a remote cloud server. Monday morning arrived in Seattle with a sharp, biting clarity. The torrential rain from the weekend had finally scrubbed the city clean, leaving the towering glass skyscrapers gleaming like sharpened blades against the pale, cloudless sky. The city was waking up to the frantic, relentless pulse of the business week, and the impending corporate execution was perfectly aligned with the rhythm of the financial district. Across town, in the lavish penthouse suite of the Grand Hotel Bradley, woke up as a man utterly convinced of his own invincibility. He stood before his floor-to-ceiling mirror, meticulously adjusting the Windsor knot of his custom $4,000 silk tie. In his deeply arrogant mind, he had executed a flawless, aggressive victory the night before. He had crushed a cheap piece of plastic under his expensive Italian leather shoe, and he firmly believed he had simultaneously crushed the only two people who could expose his catastrophic $150 million syndicate debt. He truly thought the physical destruction of a single mobile device meant he had silenced me forever. He likely spent his morning reviewing the hostile acquisition contracts for Aegis Shield, practicing his fake, humble smile for the Patriot Holdings executives who would be accompanying him to the meeting. He had absolutely no idea he was putting on a tailored suit to attend his own funeral. I was sitting in a secluded leather-backed booth at a high-end, discreet coffee house located just 2 blocks away from the highly secured headquarters of Aegis Shield. I was no longer the invisible, humiliated catering server from Saturday night. I wore a tailored charcoal gray power suit with razor-sharp lapels, my hair pulled back into a sleek, unforgiving style. I sipped a black espresso, watching the morning commuters rush past the rain-washed windows. My mind was completely clear, wiped clean of any residual anxiety or fear. The brass bell above the cafe door chimed, and Jamal stepped inside. My former brother-in-law carried himself with the effortless, commanding presence of a top-tier corporate attorney. He wore a midnight blue suit that perfectly complemented his dark skin, his heavy leather briefcase gripped firmly in one hand. He scanned the bustling room, his sharp eyes locking onto my booth, and he walked over with a calm, predatory grace. He sat down opposite me and placed a pristine, sealed black box directly on the center of the wooden table. "Good morning, Rebecca," Jamal said, his deep voice radiating a quiet, lethal satisfaction. He tapped the black box with his index finger. "I brought you a replacement for the casualty of war from Saturday night." I slid the box across the table and broke the factory seal. Inside rested a brand new top-of-the-line smartphone already configured to my exact security specifications. I powered the device on the screen, glowing brightly in the dim light of the cafe. Jamal leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table to keep his voice low. "When Bradley threw his little temper tantrum and smashed your decoy phone, he assumed the data lived locally on the hard drive. He is an outdated relic who does not understand modern cloud architecture, and he certainly does not understand military-grade encryption protocols. The microphone you wore under your catering apron was transmitting a live continuous feed directly to my secure offshore servers. The phone he destroyed was just a dummy relay station. His aggressive little stomping routine accomplished absolutely nothing except adding a destruction of property charge to his rap sheet." I tapped a secure application on the new home screen. A clean, pulsing audio file loaded instantly. I pressed play, keeping the volume low enough that only Jamal and I could hear. Bradley's harsh, arrogant voice leaked from the speaker with terrifying, crystal-clear perfection. "I need you to install a backdoor routing sequence into their mainframes. Build the backdoor route the data to the encrypted server address at the bottom of that page, and the money is yours. The recording captured every single damning syllable of the corporate espionage plot, followed by the violent crashing sound of my decoy phone shattering under his expensive shoe. I paused the playback and looked up at Jamal. "We have him on extortion, corporate espionage, and attempted theft of trade secrets," Jamal stated, taking a sip of the coffee a barista had quietly set on our table. "But that is just the appetizer, Rebecca. I spent Sunday night compiling the offshore ledgers documenting his $150 million embezzlement scheme. I packaged the entire dossier, including the high-definition audio file of his bribery attempt, and routed it through an anonymous, untraceable server directly to the Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as the Securities and Exchange Commission. A cold surge of adrenaline sharpened my focus. Have they moved on the intelligence yet? They are building the arrest warrants right now. Jamal smiled, revealing a row of perfectly white teeth. Federal agents love a neatly packaged, irrefutable corporate fraud case handed to them on a silver platter, but they will not move until the ink on his fraudulent activities is perfectly dry. Which means we proceed with the final phase of the plan exactly as scheduled. We let him walk into the building and attempt the hostile takeover. My new phone vibrated against the wooden table. A secure, heavily encrypted text message flashed across the screen from Leo. The message was concise and entirely professional. "The boardroom is prepped. Security protocols are locked down. The targets are currently in transit." I showed the illuminated screen to Jamal. Jamal checked his platinum watch, his expression hardening into a mask of pure corporate warfare. Bradley and Fiona are currently in a black luxury SUV with the senior board members of Patriot Holdings. They think they are walking into Aegis Shield to force a multi-billion-dollar acquisition and save their miserable lives. They think they are going to demand that an invisible junior coder named Leo hand over the keys to the kingdom. I picked up the new phone and slipped it into the inner breast pocket of my charcoal suit. I stood up, dropping a crisp $50 bill onto the table to cover the coffees. The calm, quiet atmosphere of the morning was officially over. The meticulous preparation was complete, the digital evidence was secured, and the execution phase had finally arrived. Bradley had spent 20 years believing that wealth and cruelty made him untouchable. He had abandoned a teenager in a hospital bed because he deemed her and her newborn child a useless burden. He had mocked my clothes, insulted my intelligence, and threatened to destroy the very son he threw away. He believed his tailored suits and loud voice could manipulate reality. He had no idea that true power does not shout in crowded VIP lounges. True power operates in absolute silence. True power owns the building he is about to walk into. Jamal stood up beside me, fastening the single button of his suit jacket. "Are you ready to introduce the Chief Executive Officer of Aegis Shield to his new investors?" "Rebecca," I looked out the cafe window toward the towering, impenetrable glass structure of my son's corporate headquarters. "Let us go. Welcome them to the slaughterhouse," I replied. The gleaming facade of Aegis Shield stood as a dark, impenetrable monolith in the heart of downtown Seattle. The building was a masterpiece of modern architecture, constructed entirely of black reinforced glass and brushed titanium. It did not invite casual visitors. It projected an aura of absolute terrifying security, rising into the rain-washed sky like a fortress guarding the digital secrets of the entire global economy. This was the empire my son had built from a single laptop in a cramped bedroom, and today it would serve as the execution block for the man who threw him away. A fleet of 3 matte black luxury SUVs pulled smoothly into the private semicircular driveway at the front entrance of the headquarters. The heavy doors swung open, and Bradley stepped out onto the pristine pavement. He paused for a moment, adjusting the lapels of his custom-tailored suit, tilting his chin upward to gaze at the towering skyscraper. To anyone watching, he looked like a conquering king, preparing to plant his flag on newly claimed territory. In his deeply delusional mind, he had already won. He firmly believed the building towering above him was just another asset waiting to be stripped, sold, and manipulated to erase his massive syndicate debt. Fiona slid out of the second vehicle, shivering theatrically in the crisp morning air. She pulled a heavy designer trench coat tighter around her shoulders, her face twisting into an expression of immediate displeasure. She hated Seattle, she hated the weather, and she clearly hated the fact that she had to be awake and functioning before 10 in the morning. Behind her emerged Bradley's mother, Caroline. She clutched a vintage, impossibly expensive handbag to her chest, looking at the sleek, minimalist surroundings of the tech campus with the distinct wrinkled nose of an old money snob forced to interact with the working class. Trailing behind the family was a pack of aggressive corporate lawyers from Bradley's bottom feeder firm, carrying thick leather briefcases and sporting predatory synchronized smiles. Flanking Bradley were two senior board members from Patriot Holdings, Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher. These were the ultra-conservative, deep-pocketed investors Bradley was desperately trying to con into a buyout. Bradley turned to them, flashing his brilliant, entirely fabricated smile, guiding them toward the revolving glass doors with a sweeping possessive gesture, acting exactly as if he had already signed the deed to the property. The group marched into the grand lobby of Aegis Shield. The interior was a cathedral of cutting-edge technology. There were no plush sofas, no warm lighting, and no traditional artwork. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the harsh, cool glow of the massive holographic displays suspended in the center of the room, which mapped real-time global cyber threats in glowing blue data streams. The silence in the vast space was absolute, broken only by the sharp, authoritative click of Fiona's designer heels striking the stone floor. Bradley led his entourage directly past the biometric security turnstiles, stopping abruptly at the sprawling minimalist reception desk. Behind the desk stood a young, impeccably groomed security liaison named David. David had been fully briefed by Jamal's elite security team earlier that morning. He knew exactly who these people were, and he knew exactly what was waiting for them on the top floor. Bradley did not offer a greeting. He did not say good morning. He simply slapped his hand flat against the reception desk, leaning his weight forward to intimidate the younger man. "I am Bradley, Chief Executive Officer of the Vanguard Fund," he announced, his voice booming loudly through the quiet lobby, deliberately projecting his authority for the benefit of the Patriot Holdings investors standing behind him. "I am here for the 9 o'clock acquisition meeting with the executive board. Have my legal team cleared through your security scanners immediately and send an escort to take us to the top floor. We have a very tight schedule today." David maintained a perfectly stoic, unreadable expression. His hands moved swiftly over his illuminated terminal. One moment, Sir David replied, his voice a smooth, automated hum of corporate efficiency. "Let me pull up the visitor manifest for the executive suite." Fiona let out a loud, highly exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes dramatically at her mother-in-law. She leaned over the desk, snapping her manicured fingers directly in David's face. "While you are looking at your little computer screen, be useful and have someone fetch us coffee," Fiona demanded, her tone dripping with toxic, unadulterated entitlement. "I need a non-fat vanilla latte, extra hot, and make sure whoever brings it does not spill a single drop. The service in this city is absolutely atrocious." Caroline stepped up beside Fiona, looking around the pristine, high-tech lobby with a deep sneer of disgust. "It is incredibly sterile in here," Caroline remarked, speaking loudly enough for Bradley's investors to hear. "All this glass and metal, it lacks the warmth and class of a proper financial institution. It feels like a hospital for computers." "Do not worry, Fiona, darling. Once Bradley takes over this operation, we will have interior decorators come in and fix this dreadful, tasteless aesthetic." Bradley chuckled, turning to Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher with a conspiratorial, arrogant wink. "That is the first order of business, gentlemen. Restructuring the environment and trimming the fat. These tech startups have no idea how to run a real corporation. They let junior coders think they own the place." Bradley laughed again, a harsh, ugly sound. "First thing I am doing tomorrow is going down to the server room and firing a few useless, ungrateful kids just to remind the staff who actually signs their paychecks now." The two investors nodded politely, clearly, buying into Bradley's aggressive take-charge facade. They believed they were watching a master negotiator preparing to gut a bloated tech company. They had absolutely no idea Bradley was actively bragging about his plan to fire the billionaire owner of the building. David looked up from his terminal, his face a masterclass in professional neutrality. He retrieved a stack of temporary limited access security badges from a drawer and placed them neatly on the desk. "The executive board is expecting you in the primary boardroom on the top floor," David stated smoothly, handing the badges to Bradley's lead lawyer. "Proceed through the far right turnstile. The private elevator will take you directly to the executive suite." Bradley snatched his badge without a word of thanks, clipping it to his tailored lapel. He gestured for the lawyers and investors to follow him, marching toward the sleek stainless steel elevator banks, like a military general leading a parade. Fiona lingered for a fraction of a second at the reception desk, glaring at David. "I am still waiting for my coffee," she hissed, furious that her demand had been ignored. "You people are entirely incompetent. I will be speaking to human resources about your attitude the moment this buyout is finalized." David simply smiled, a polite, chillingly hollow smile. "Have a wonderful meeting, ma'am," he replied smoothly. "I am sure you will find exactly what you are looking for upstairs." Fiona scoffed, turning on her heel to chase after her husband. She hurried into the spacious mirrored elevator car, squeezing in beside Caroline and the aggressive legal team. Bradley stood at the front, adjusting his tie one last time as the heavy steel doors began to slide shut. The villains were officially in the elevator, ascending rapidly toward the executive floor, completely blinded by their own towering greed and toxic entitlement. They were bickering about the terrible lobby decor and planning how they would spend the acquisition money, blissfully, wonderfully unaware that the doors were about to open into a perfectly designed, inescapable slaughterhouse. The private elevator glided to a silent, frictionless halt on the top floor of the Aegis Shield headquarters. The heavy steel doors slid apart to reveal the executive lobby. It was a breathtaking, sprawling expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass that offered an uninterrupted panoramic view of the Seattle skyline and the churning gray waters of the harbor below. The space was devoid of the chaotic noise from the lower levels. It possessed the hushed, pressurized atmosphere of absolute corporate dominance. Bradley stepped out first, adjusting his tie and puffing out his chest. He turned to the two senior investors from Patriot Holdings, Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher, gesturing grandly at the minimalist architecture as if he had personally designed it. Fiona followed closely behind him. One of the junior attorneys from Bradley's legal team had frantically procured a steaming cup of artisan coffee from a lobby barista just before the elevator doors closed, handing it to her like an obedient servant. Fiona took a sip, her eyes scanning the immaculate executive floor, searching for something to critique. Instead, her gaze locked onto a lone figure standing near the entrance of the primary boardroom. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting at my sides. I was wearing my custom-tailored charcoal gray power suit. The cut was immaculate, projecting an aura of pure, unyielding authority. But Fiona was completely blinded by the false narrative she and Bradley had constructed. When she looked at me, she did not see a high-ranking corporate executive. She saw the terrified, desperate teenage mother they had left in a hospital bed 20 years ago. She assumed I had somehow bypassed security and tracked them down to this floor to beg for mercy. She firmly believed I was there to drop to my knees and plead with Bradley not to fire my son from his supposedly insignificant internship. A vicious, triumphant smirk spread across Fiona's painted lips. She marched directly toward me, her designer heels clicking sharply against the polished obsidian floor. She completely ignored the breathtaking view and the intimidating silence of the executive suite, entirely focused on executing what she believed would be my ultimate public humiliation. Bradley noticed my presence a second later. He let out a harsh, arrogant scoff, shaking his head and muttering a disparaging comment to his investors about his unhinged ex-wife stalking his vital business meetings. Fiona stopped mere inches from me. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of toxic, elitist disgust. "Are you genuinely this pathetic, Rebecca?" Fiona asked, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet lobby. "Did you honestly think you could just sneak up to the executive floor and beg my husband for a favor? Let me guess. You realized Bradley holds your son's entire pathetic future in the palm of his hand, And you came crawling here to ask him to let the boy keep his little desk job. I did not respond. I maintained unbroken predatory eye contact, letting her absolute delusion fuel the fire burning in my chest. My silence only emboldened her. She took my lack of a response as total submission. You should have taken the $50,000 check when you had the chance. Fiona sneered, stepping even closer. Now you get absolutely nothing. Bradley is going to acquire this company today, and the very first thing he will do is terminate your son. You are going back to whatever miserable poverty-stricken hole you crawled out of. Fiona decided that words were no longer sufficient. She wanted a physical demonstration of her superiority. She wanted to break me right in front of the wealthy investors her husband was trying to con. With a calculated theatrical gasp, Fiona suddenly jerked her shoulder forward. She faked a clumsy stumble on the perfectly flat, flawless floor. With a sharp, intentional flick of her wrist, she hurled the entire contents of her steaming coffee cup directly at my chest. The scalding dark liquid splashed violently against the crisp lapel of my charcoal suit. The hot coffee soaked instantly through the expensive fabric, spreading into an ugly dark stain across my white silk blouse. Drops of brown liquid splattered onto the pristine obsidian floor at my feet. "Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly sorry," Fiona shrieked, pressing a hand to her chest in a display of entirely fabricated shock. Her eyes, however, burned with pure, malicious delight. She did not even attempt to hide her cruel satisfaction. "I guess I just lost my footing. But really, Rebecca, you should not be standing in the way of important people. You are staining the carpet of a real corporate building. You look like absolute trash. You really need to leave before security drags you out." Bradley chuckled loudly from across the lobby, making zero effort to conceal his amusement. He turned to Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher, raising his hands in a gesture of mock apology. "Gentlemen, please excuse this ridiculous interruption," Bradley said, projecting his booming, arrogant voice. "This is exactly the kind of unstable behavior I have had to deal with for 2 decades. My ex-wife seems to think she can disrupt a multi-billion-dollar acquisition by throwing a tantrum in the hallway. I will have the building guards remove her immediately so we can get down to business." I did not flinch. I did not scream. I did not take a single step backward. The scalding heat of the coffee burned against my skin, but my posture remained perfectly rigid, my expression locked into a terrifying, icy stillness. I simply looked down at the dark stain ruining my custom suit, and then I slowly raised my eyes to meet Fiona's gaze. The sheer absolute lack of panic in my eyes caught her off guard. Fiona expected tears. She expected me to shout, to cry, to flee the floor in utter humiliation. My dead, unblinking stare made her triumphant smile falter for a microsecond. She shifted her weight nervously, suddenly hyper-aware of the predatory silence radiating from my stance. Before Fiona could formulate another insult, a soft electronic chime echoed through the lobby. The heavy steel doors of the secondary private elevator slid open. Jamal stepped out onto the executive floor. He looked magnificent. He wore a bespoke midnight blue suit that projected raw power and unyielding sophistication. He carried his heavy leather briefcase in one hand, his posture radiating the undeniable authority of a top-tier corporate attorney. Jamal took in the scene instantly. He saw Bradley playing the arrogant showman for the investors. He saw Fiona holding the empty coffee cup with a malicious sneer. And he saw me standing perfectly still with dark liquid soaking into my tailored jacket. Jamal did not look at Bradley. He did not acknowledge the aggressive legal team or the bewildered investors from Patriot Holdings. He walked with slow, measured, deliberate steps directly across the obsidian floor until he reached my side. Without uttering a single syllable, Jamal reached into the inner breast pocket of his designer suit jacket. He withdrew a pristine, perfectly folded white silk handkerchief. He extended his hand, offering the silk square to me, with a gesture of profound, unwavering respect. I took the handkerchief from my brother-in-law, wiping the coffee away, while keeping my eyes locked dead on Fiona's rapidly paling face. The trap was fully loaded, the bait had been taken, and the final execution was about to commence. I dabbed the dark liquid from my lapel with the pristine silk handkerchief Jamal had handed me. The searing heat against my skin was nothing compared to the cold, absolute focus crystallizing in my mind. I did not break eye contact with Fiona. Her triumphant sneer was already beginning to falter, replaced by a creeping, unspoken confusion. I was not acting like a victim. I was acting like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Bradley, having just finished his loud, performative apology to his investors, finally turned his attention fully toward the disruption. He saw me, which he expected, but then his eyes landed on Jamal. The arrogant, self-satisfied grin vanished from Bradley's face, replaced instantly by a look of profound, aggressive irritation. He recognized his former brother-in-law immediately. Well, well, Bradley boomed, his voice echoing harshly across the polished obsidian floor. He marched over, leaving Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher standing awkwardly near the elevator bank. What exactly is this A-family reunion for the bottom feeders? He stopped a few feet away, looking Jamal up and down with an expression of toxic, thinly veiled racism. He took in Jamal's bespoke midnight blue suit, his expensive leather briefcase, and his flawless posture. Bradley's ego simply refused to compute the image. In Bradley's narrow, elitist worldview, a black man married to his sister could only ever be a secondary character, someone to be tolerated at holiday dinners but never respected in a corporate setting. I have to ask, Jamal. Bradley, sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. Did you get lost looking for the service elevator? Or did Rebecca actually hire you to beg for her son's internship? I know you run a cute little practice handling messy divorces for desperate housewives, but you are severely out of your depth on this floor. This building is for big players handling multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. They do not let low-rate street lawyers negotiate in these boardrooms. Jamal did not flinch. He did not tighten his jaw, and he certainly did not raise his voice. He stood with the relaxed, terrifying ease of a man holding a royal flush. He allowed Bradley's racist microaggressions to hang in the crisp, pressurized air of the executive lobby, letting the sheer ignorance of the statement resonate for the benefit of everyone listening. Fiona, sensing an opportunity to pile on, stepped up beside her husband. She crossed her arms, careful not to let her expensive coat touch my coffee-stained suit. You two really are pathetic, she scoffed. You orchestrate this little ambush wearing your rented suits, thinking you can intimidate Bradley in front of his investors. It is embarrassing. Security is going to drag you both out by your collars. I remained perfectly silent, tossing the ruined silk handkerchief into a nearby brushed steel receptacle. I smoothed down the front of my jacket. The stain was prominent, but my posture was absolute steel. Jamal finally smiled. It was a terrifying, brilliant expression that completely unnerved the Patriot Holdings executives standing a few yards away. They were seasoned corporate sharks, and they could instantly recognize when someone was holding absolute authority. Jamal did not look like a lost divorce lawyer. He looked like he owned the entire floor. Good morning, Bradley. Jamal said, his voice a smooth, resonant baritone that instantly commanded the vast space. And a very good morning to you, Mr. Thorne. Mr. Gallagher. The two senior investors blinked in surprise. Mr. Thorne stepped forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. Excuse me, he said, his voice cautious. Do we know you? Bradley turned a violent shade of red. Do not engage with him, Arthur Bradley snapped, trying desperately to regain control of the narrative. He is just a cheap attorney trying to cause a scene to extort me. He has absolutely no business being anywhere near a high-level tech campus. Jamal ignored Bradley entirely, keeping his attention fixed on the investors. My name is Jamal Carter. I am the chief legal counsel for Aegis Shield. I oversee every contract, every merger, and every acquisition that crosses the threshold of this building. I am fully aware of why you are here today, gentlemen. The color drained simultaneously from the faces of Bradley and Fiona. The aggressive legal team standing behind them suddenly looked incredibly nervous, frantically exchanging panicked glances. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. His brain was violently rejecting the reality unfolding in front of him. The man he had just insulted, the man he had dismissed as a low-rate divorce lawyer, was the absolute legal authority of the multi-billion-dollar unicorn he was trying to acquire. You, Bradley stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Jamal. That is impossible. You do not work here. You are just Tara's husband. You're just a Jamal cut him off with a single sharp look that possessed enough kinetic force to physically stop Bradley in his tracks. You have spent your entire life underestimating the people around you, Bradley. Jamal stated, his voice ringing with lethal precision. You judge intelligence by the color of a person's skin and the price tag on their watch. You look at Rebecca and see a victim. You look at me and see a stereotype. That arrogance has cost you everything. Jamal turned away from Bradley's horrified face. He walked slowly, deliberately toward the massive frosted glass and titanium double doors that served as the entrance to the primary executive boardroom. He placed his hands flat against the heavy metal handles. Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher stood perfectly still, their seasoned corporate instincts screaming that they had just walked into a massive, catastrophic trap. Bradley stood frozen, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically between me and Jamal. Fiona had gone entirely silent, her manicured hands trembling at her sides. Jamal pushed the heavy doors open. They glided apart on silent hinges, revealing a cavernous, breathtaking boardroom bathed in natural light. The long, polished obsidian table gleamed under the recessed ceiling lights. It was an arena designed for corporate slaughter. Jamal stepped aside, holding the door open. He looked directly at Bradley, a cold, predatory smile locking onto his face. "After you," Jamal said, his voice echoing perfectly down the quiet hallway. "Our CEO has been waiting 20 years for this meeting." The heavy double doors closed behind us with a solid pressurized seal, cutting off any ambient noise from the executive lobby. The primary boardroom of Aegis Shield was a magnificent temple of modern corporate dominance. It spanned the entire width of the top floor, bordered by angled floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a dizzying view of the churning Seattle harbor. A massive, polished obsidian table stretched down the center of the room, equipped with flush-mounted digital interfaces and sleek titanium microphones. Bradley marched into the room first, his chest puffed out desperately, trying to maintain his facade of control. He gestured for Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher to take their seats along the right flank of the table. He was moving with frantic, jerky energy, his eyes darting around the cavernous space as he searched for whoever he believed was actually in charge. He completely ignored the layout of power in the room, acting like a conqueror who had already won the war. Fiona and Caroline followed, pulling out heavy leather chairs and sitting down with theatrical elegance. Fiona immediately snapped her fingers at the empty air, turning around to locate me. She fully expected me to be standing by the heavy wooden doors, head bowed, waiting to pour her a glass of sparkling water. She expected to see a broken, humiliated woman hiding in the shadows of the room. Instead, I walked directly past her. My posture was absolute steel. The sharp, measured sound of my heels striking the obsidian floor echoed through the vast boardroom. I did not walk with the hurried, anxious steps of an employee. I moved with the effortless, predatory grace of an apex predator patrolling its own territory. Bradley turned, ready to bark an order at me to stand against the wall. He opened his mouth, but the sheer velocity of my confidence choked the words right out of his throat. He watched, completely paralyzed, as I bypassed the long rows of guest seating entirely. I walked straight toward the elevated tier at the far end of the sprawling table. Arranged at the apex of the room were 3 massive high-backed leather executive chairs. Before the center chair sat a polished titanium placard currently turned away from the guests. To its right was a plaque bearing Jamal Carter, Chief Legal Counsel. I stopped behind the chair on the left. I placed my hands on the cool leather, pulling it out with a smooth, practiced motion. I did not look at Bradley. I did not look at Fiona. I simply lowered myself into the seat, crossing my legs and folding my hands, resting them perfectly beside the engraved titanium plaque that caught the overhead light. It read, "Rebecca, Chief Strategy Officer." The silence in the room became absolute. The air pressure seemed to drop violently, sucking the oxygen out of the lungs of every hostile person at the table. I reached into a concealed console built seamlessly into the table surface and withdrew a fresh, pristine white silk handkerchief. With slow, methodical precision, I dabbed at the dark coffee stain Fiona had intentionally splashed across my lapel. I was totally unbothered. I did not look angry or humiliated. I looked like a monarch calmly wiping dust from her boot. The realization hit Fiona like a freight train moving at maximum velocity. I watched it happen in real time. The arrogant, toxic smirk completely melted off her face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together in her shallow mind. My tailored charcoal suit was not a cheap department store knockoff. It was custom Italian wool worth more than her entire heavily mortgaged wardrobe. The utter lack of panic in my eyes downstairs, the way the building's security had ignored her demands, the fact that Jamal possessed the authority to open these doors. Fiona realized the woman she had just assaulted, the woman she had mocked and ordered to fetch coffee, was the second most powerful executive in a multi-billion-dollar technology empire. The blood drained so rapidly from her face that she looked physically ill. Her jaw actually dropped open, her manicured hands gripping the edge of the obsidian table as if she were plummeting off a cliff. Bradley was equally devastated, his mind completely short-circuiting. He stared at the titanium plaque bearing my name and title. He looked at me sitting with absolute authority, and then he looked at Jamal, who smoothly took his seat on the right side of the apex, opening his leather briefcase with a calm, businesslike snap. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Bradley stammered, his voice cracking entirely devoid of its usual booming resonance. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Get out of that chair. You do not work here. You are trying to sabotage my acquisition by playing dress-up." I finally raised my eyes and locked them onto his. The temperature in the room plummeted. "Welcome to Aegis Shield, gentlemen," I said, my voice echoing with chilling, flat authority. I completely ignored Bradley, projecting my voice directly to the two senior investors from Patriot Holdings. "I am Rebecca, Chief Strategy Officer. I oversee all long-term growth initiatives, domestic operations, and hostile acquisition defense protocols for this corporation." Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher stared at me, then turned their hard, furious gazes toward Bradley. They were seasoned corporate sharks, and they instantly recognized that they had been lied to. Bradley had promised them an easy buyout of a vulnerable tech startup. Instead, he had walked them blindly into an ambush orchestrated by the very woman he had been publicly smearing in the press all week. Bradley slammed both of his hands onto the table, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "This is a complete fraud," he shouted, desperation making him reckless. "I am not negotiating with my bitter ex-wife and her divorce lawyer. I demand to see the chief executive officer immediately. I demand to see the person who actually runs this company. I am going to buy this entire building, and my first official act will be having security throw you both onto the street." I finished dabbing my lapel and tossed the soiled silk handkerchief onto the pristine table. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, a cold, predatory smile finally touching my lips. "You want to speak to the chief executive officer?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, yet commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the room. Bradley glared at me, his chest heaving as panic and fury warred for control of his mind. "Yes," he spat. "Bring him out here right now." I looked past Bradley, directing my gaze to the massive, high-backed leather chair situated squarely between Jamal and me. The chair had been turned away from the table since the moment they entered the room, facing the sprawling view of the Seattle harbor. I did not say another word. Jamal simply leaned forward and tapped a small button on his digital interface. The execution was perfectly choreographed. The center chair began to slowly swivel around to face the table. The heavy leather chair turned with a smooth mechanical hum. The high back cleared the line of sight, revealing the person who held absolute authority over the multi-billion-dollar fortress we were sitting in. It was Leo. He was not wearing a bespoke Italian suit. He was not wearing a tie. He sat perfectly relaxed in the exact same faded black hoodie and dark jeans he had worn to the hotel gala the night before. His hands rested casually on the armrests, his posture radiating a terrifying, effortless dominance. He did not look like a frightened 20-year-old college dropout. He looked like a king sitting on a throne of his own making, staring down at a peasant who had wandered blindly into his court. Jamal stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. His voice boomed across the silent boardroom, delivering the executioner's strike with flawless articulation. Gentlemen of Patriot Holdings, Jamal announced, gesturing toward the center chair. Allow me to introduce you to the founder and chief executive officer of Aegis Shield, Leo. The physical reaction was instantaneous and violently visceral. Bradley did not just stumble. His knees completely gave out beneath him. All the arrogant manufactured strength evaporated from his body in a single fraction of a second. He collapsed heavily into the leather guest chair behind him, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. His eyes bulged, darting wildly from the titanium plaque bearing my name to the boy in the black hoodie who commanded the center of the room. Fiona let out a strangled, breathless sound, clapping a hand over her mouth. Caroline slumped back her vintage handbag, dropping to the floor with a heavy thud. The entire aggressive legal team representing Bradley's fund collectively stopped breathing. The reality of their situation crashed down on them with the weight of a collapsing skyscraper. The kid Bradley had cornered in the VIP lounge, the supposedly desperate junior coder he had threatened to fire. The boy he had offered a pathetic $10,000 bribe to commit corporate espionage. That boy was the absolute sovereign of the empire Bradley was trying to steal. Leo leaned forward, resting his elbows on the obsidian table. He fixed his gaze directly on his biological father, his eyes burning with a cold, analytical intelligence that offered zero mercy. You offered me $10,000 to install a backdoor routing sequence into my own mainframes, Leo stated. His voice was calm, steady, and amplified perfectly by the table microphones, ensuring every single person in the room heard the accusation clearly. You told me Aegis Shield was mismanaging its proprietary data. You told me I was just a replaceable cog, a rounding error on a balance sheet. You promised you would save my career if I helped you steal my own financial metrics to force a hostile takeover. Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher, the senior investors from Patriot Holdings, turned physically toward Bradley. The color drained from their seasoned faces. They were ultra-conservative men who despised scandal, and they had just been informed that the man begging for their capital was actively attempting to execute a felony espionage plot against the very company he promised them. Bradley. Mr. Thorne barked, his voice sharp and furious. What on earth is he talking about? Did you attempt to bribe a corporate officer to commit theft? Bradley raised his shaking hands, a thick layer of nervous sweat suddenly coating his forehead. No, he stammered, his voice pitching high with sheer panic. Arthur, listen to me. This is a setup. This is my estranged son. He is colluding with his mother to ruin me. They are lying. I never offered him a bribe. I never asked him to hack the company. I just met with him to offer to pay his college tuition. He is lying to you, Bradley shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. He is a dropout. He does not run this company. They are just trying to sabotage the acquisition because Rebecca is a bitter, unstable woman holding a 20-year grudge. Leo did not raise his voice. He simply tapped a few keys on the slim digital console embedded in the table in front of him. If I am lying, Leo said smoothly, leaning back in his chair, then I suppose the audio recording we captured last night must be a complete fabrication. But let us allow our distinguished guests from Patriot Holdings to judge the authenticity of your voice for themselves. Leo pressed a final button. The high-fidelity surround sound system of the executive boardroom flared to life. The audio was pristine, stripped of any background noise from the hotel gala. The recording played loudly, bouncing off the glass walls and filling every corner of the vast space. I need you to install a backdoor routing sequence into their mainframes. Bradley's recorded voice echoed harsh and dripping with condescension. Nothing destructive, just a quiet, undetectable pipeline that feeds me their internal financial metrics, unredacted shareholder agreements, and key trade secrets. With that data, I can force a buyout. I can acquire Aegis Shield. The recording continued, playing the exact moment Bradley handed over the list of target data, right up to the sickening crunch of my decoy phone being stomped under his shoe. When the audio cut off, the silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Bradley sat frozen in his chair, his entire body trembling violently. The arrogant, untouchable CEO facade was completely annihilated. He was reduced to a pathetic, cornered fraud staring directly into the abyss of his own making. Mr. Thorne stood up, his face a mask of pure corporate fury. He looked down at Bradley with utter disgust. Patriot Holdings does not do business with criminals, he stated coldly. Our legal team will be contacting the authorities regarding this attempted fraud. We are entirely finished here. The two investors did not wait for a response. They turned on their heels and marched out of the boardroom, abandoning Bradley to his fate. Leo folded his hands together on the table, looking at the man who had abandoned him in a hospital room 2 decades ago. You walked into my building assuming I was a peasant you could buy with pocket change, Leo said, delivering the fatal blow with terrifying precision. You thought you could use me as a human shield to save yourself from a European syndicate. You are not a visionary, Bradley. You are a bankrupt, desperate thief who just confessed to federal crimes in my boardroom. I sat perfectly still in my chair, watching my son execute the man who had tried to destroy us. The trap had closed, the prey was completely paralyzed, and the final financial execution was ready to begin. The heavy double doors of the boardroom clicked shut, sealing the room in a suffocating, pressurized silence. Mr. Thorne and Mr. Gallagher were gone, taking with them the absolute last shred of hope Bradley possessed. The aggressive legal team that had marched into the building like conquerors were now staring at the floor, their faces pale, silently calculating how quickly they could resign from representing Vanguard Fund. Bradley remained slumped in his guest chair. His chest heaved erratically. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and was experiencing the terrifying freefall before hitting the concrete. Leo did not give him a single second to recover. He reached out and tapped a second button on the digital console embedded in the obsidian table. The high-fidelity speakers cracked to life once more. This time, the audio did not feature the ambient background noise of a luxury hotel lounge. The sound was harsh, sterile, and unmistakable. It was the rhythmic, piercing beep of a hospital heart monitor. The color completely drained from Bradley's face. Caroline gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in genuine horror. A younger, sharper version of Bradley's voice echoed through the vast executive boardroom. You and that baby are just a massive burden to my future. I am done. The sharp metallic clatter of a wedding ring hitting a plastic tray rang out through the speakers, followed by the heavy thud of a hospital door slamming shut. I sat perfectly still, listening to the exact moment my life had shattered 20 years ago, now weaponized and broadcast in the very fortress my son had built. Leo pressed the button, silencing the room once more. He fixed his gaze on the man who had abandoned us. You spent the last week telling the media that you were a heartbroken father, Leo stated, his voice ringing with absolute clinical detachment. You spun a pathetic, fabricated narrative about a stolen child to secure a corporate buyout. But the truth is, you threw us away because we were inconvenient. You left a 15-year-old girl bleeding in a recovery room so you could chase a luxury lifestyle in Europe. Bradley opened his mouth, his jaw working frantically, but no sound came out. The sheer volume of his exposure had mentally paralyzed him. Leo reached across the polished table and picked up the thick leather-bound merger and acquisition contract that Bradley's legal team had brought to the meeting. It was the document Bradley believed would save him from the European syndicate. Leo held the heavy contract up, ensuring Bradley had a perfect view of it. Then he pressed a panel on the table. A motorized slot opened, revealing a heavy-duty industrial shredder built directly into the boardroom furniture. You wanted to acquire Aegis Shield, Leo said smoothly. You wanted to restructure my leadership and trim the fat. Leo fed the thick document directly into the shredder. The grinding mechanical roar filled the room violently, chewing the contract into thousands of meaningless paper shreds. Bradley flinched at the noise, physically recoiling, as his entire corporate salvation was destroyed right in front of his face. When the machine stopped, Leo reached into his black messenger bag resting beside his chair. He pulled out a sleek crimson-red folder. With a swift, precise motion, he slid it across the long obsidian table. It glided frictionlessly over the polished surface, stopping exactly an inch from Bradley's trembling hands. Open it, Leo commanded. Bradley stared at the crimson folder as if it were a venomous snake. His hands shook violently as he reached out, peeling back the cover. He stared at the heavily stamped financial documents inside his eyes, darting frantically across the pages. His breathing hitched, accelerating into a full-blown panic attack. I do not understand, Bradley stammered, his voice weak and entirely broken. How did you get these? These are private ledgers. Jamal stood up from his seat at the apex of the table, buttoning his suit jacket with a sharp, authoritative snap. Those are not just ledgers, Bradley. They are formal transfer of debt agreements. You see, when you recklessly borrowed $150 million from a shadow syndicate in Europe, you signed a highly aggressive, unconditional promissory note. You assumed they would just break your legs if you failed to pay. Jamal began to pace slowly down the length of the boardroom. But criminals are businessmen too. When Aegis Shield approached them last night through secure offshore channels and offered to purchase your entire debt portfolio at a premium, they gladly sold you out. They transferred the debt, the collateral, and the legal right of collection entirely to us. Fiona let out a sharp, terrified cry. She gripped the armrests of her chair, her emerald green gown suddenly looking absurd in the face of absolute financial ruin. What does that mean? She shrieked, her voice cracking under the pressure. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my forearms on the table. I looked directly into Bradley's terrified eyes. It means you no longer owe the syndicate, Bradley, I said, my voice dropping into a register of pure lethal satisfaction. It means Aegis Shield secretly bought every single cent of your debt. My son is now your sole creditor. We own your hedge fund. We own your personal assets. We own you. Bradley looked back at Leo, his face slick with cold sweat. You cannot do this. I do not have the liquid capital. The market crashed. The fund is completely empty. I am entirely aware of your insolvency, Leo replied, his tone chillingly flat. And per the specific predatory clauses you eagerly signed with that syndicate, the debt is instantly callable upon a change of holding entity. I am invoking that clause right now. Leo leaned forward, mirroring my posture perfectly. I am calling the entire $150 million due today. You have until 5 o'clock this evening to transfer the full amount into the Aegis corporate holding accounts. If the funds are not secured by the deadline, I will initiate an immediate hostile liquidation of your entire estate. I cannot pay that! Bradley screamed, his voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate wail. You know I cannot pay that. You are bankrupting me. You bankrupted yourself, Jamal corrected sharply, stopping right beside Bradley's chair. We are simply collecting the bill. And considering I forwarded your entire embezzlement history to the Federal Bureau of Investigation an hour ago, I highly doubt any bank on this planet will offer you a loan. The lead attorney representing Vanguard Fund immediately stood up, slamming his briefcase shut. He did not say a single word to Bradley. He simply signaled to his junior partners, and the entire legal team practically sprinted out of the boardroom, abandoning their toxic criminal client to his inescapable fate. Bradley was completely trapped. The walls had closed and the exits were sealed, and the financial execution was absolute. The heavy double doors clicked shut behind the fleeing legal team, leaving an absolute vacuum of power in their wake. Bradley remained frozen in his chair, his chest heaving, as the crushing reality of his $150 million debt suffocated him. But the silence inside the executive boardroom was abruptly shattered by a sound rising from the Seattle streets below. It started as a faint, distant wail, but it rapidly multiplied and amplified. The sharp, piercing shriek of federal sirens echoed against the black glass of the Aegis Shield skyscraper. Jamal casually checked his platinum watch, adjusting his pristine cuffs. Right on schedule, Jamal noted, his voice smooth and entirely unbothered. The Cybercrimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation takes high-level corporate embezzlement very seriously, especially when the evidence is handed to them in a perfectly organized, highly encrypted dossier. They are entering the main lobby right now. Fiona snapped her head toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the glass, painting her pale, horrified face in alternating strokes of panic. The reality of federal prison asset seizure and total social annihilation finally pierced her thick layer of toxic entitlement. She spun around, turning on Bradley with the vicious speed of a starving animal. You lied to me! Fiona shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical pitch. You told me you were a billionaire. You told me you had everything under control. You used my name, you used my connections, and you dragged me into a massive federal fraud scheme. I am not going to prison for you." Fiona scrambled out of her heavy leather chair, nearly tripping over the hem of her emerald green evening gown. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at her husband, who was still slumped backward in a state of catatonic shock. "I am filing for divorce, this exact second," Fiona screamed, clutching her vintage handbag to her chest. "I want a complete annulment. I want every single one of my personal assets isolated from your sinking ship. You are a disgusting, pathetic fraud, and I will not let you drag me down into the dirt." She turned on her heel and sprinted toward the massive double doors of the boardroom. She grabbed the titanium handles desperately, throwing her weight against them to pull them open. She intended to march down to the lobby and offer Bradley up to the federal agents on a silver platter to save her own skin. But as the heavy doors swung outward, her escape route was violently cut off. 4 heavily armored Aegis Shield security personnel stood shoulder to shoulder in the corridor, forming an impenetrable human wall. They did not speak. They did not move. They simply stared down at the shrieking, frantic woman in the green gown, absolutely refusing to let her pass. "Let me out," Fiona demanded, slamming her hands against the chest of the lead guard. "I am not a part of his company. I have absolutely nothing to do with his illegal syndicate debts. You have no right to hold me here." The lead guard did not even blink. He gently but firmly pushed Fiona backward into the boardroom and pulled the massive doors shut again, locking her inside the glass cage with the man she had just violently repudiated. Caroline sat frozen in the corner, her face buried in her hands, quietly weeping as her entire world of country club memberships and high society prestige burned to ash. Bradley finally moved. The sirens wailing directly beneath the building snapped the last remaining thread of his sanity. The arrogant, posturing chief executive officer was entirely dead. What remained was a broken, terrified shell of a man facing the absolute end of his existence. He slid out of his leather guest chair and hit the polished obsidian floor. He did not stand up. He dropped heavily onto his hands and knees. Bradley began to crawl. He crawled across the immaculate floor, his expensive tailored suit dragging against the stone. He moved past Jamal, past the center of the massive table, heading directly toward the elevated tier where I sat. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the cold sweat of sheer panic. He reached the foot of my chair, looking up at me with red, desperate eyes. "Rebecca, please," Bradley sobbed, his voice a pathetic, broken wheeze. "Please do not do this to me. I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. I will publicly apologize. Just please call off the debt. Call off the federal agents. You cannot let me go to prison. I will not survive it." I looked down at the man groveling at my feet. I felt absolutely nothing. There was no pity, no lingering anger, no satisfying rush of vengeance. Looking at him now, I only felt an overwhelming sense of clinical disgust. Bradley turned his frantic, tear-streaked face toward the center of the table. "Leo, please," he begged, reaching a trembling hand toward his son. "I am your father. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I am your blood. You cannot send your own father to a federal penitentiary. You have to save me. Please, son, I am begging you." Leo did not lean forward. He did not raise his voice. He sat back in his chair, his face a mask of terrifying youthful authority. "You are not my father," Leo stated, his tone carrying the cold mechanical precision of a crushing hydraulic press. "My mother built this empire from nothing while you were busy spending stolen money in Europe. I do not share your blood. I only share your creditors. And your time is officially up." I stood up slowly from the chair marked Chief Strategy Officer. I adjusted the cuffs of my charcoal suit, completely ignoring the dark coffee stain on my lapel. It was no longer a mark of humiliation. It was a badge of absolute victory. I looked down at Bradley, who was openly weeping against the polished floor, his fingers desperately clawing at the air near my shoes. I pressed the silver intercom button embedded in the surface of the obsidian table. "Security, clean this up. Trash this pathetic stains the company carpets." The heavy double doors swung open instantly. The security team marched into the boardroom, their boots clicking sharply against the stone. They grabbed Bradley by the arms, hauling the sobbing, thrashing man off the floor. They grabbed Fiona, who was still screaming about her divorce lawyers, and dragged them both toward the waiting elevators, delivering them directly into the hands of the federal agents waiting in the lobby below. Caroline followed behind them, her head bowed in absolute silent defeat. The room fell perfectly quiet once more. I picked up my phone and slipped it into my pocket. I looked at Jamal, who gave a slow, respectful nod, snapping his briefcase shut. I looked at Leo, who pulled his hood back down, a quiet, genuine smile, finally touching his lips. We turned away from the sprawling view of the Seattle harbor. Together, the three of us walked down from the elevated tier, our footsteps echoing in perfect synchronization. We walked out of the executive boardroom, passing through the massive glass doors, and stepped into the sunlit, immaculate corridor of Aegis Shield. We did not look back. We left Bradley to his absolute ruin. A profound lesson from this story is that your self-worth is never defined by the people who fail to appreciate you. Toxic dynamics, like being abandoned or belittled, leave deep scars. But true strength lies in walking away from conditional love. Ultimately, families are not defined by biology, but by the consistent choice to show up and prioritize one another. Healing truly begins when you stop seeking validation from those who tear you down and instead build a successful, authentic life on your own terms. Share your own experience with setting healthy boundaries and comment below.